The time when we start building the last missing piece of the UI is finally here. NoteFormPage is the most complex widget in this app, so we have to divide its implementation into manageable parts. Let's now focus on everything except for form fields. Hello, welcome to Risokoro, where you're getting prepared for real app development so that you will get freelance clients or a job and be confident about the apps you build. So subscribe and hit the bell to join us on our quest for becoming in-demand Flutter developers. So we're going to start off finally building the NoteFormPage, which is stemming out of the NoteForm state for the NoteForm block, which we have built some while ago. And because pages are dependent on the respective state of the block with which they're operating, even more so when it comes to NoteFormPages, or another sort of a form page which we have in this app is of course for the authentication sign-in form page, right? These two states are very similar, sign-in form state and NoteForm state. They are just variations on the same thing. We want to have this state working with a form which we can fill in. And basically, because NoteFormPage is going to be absolutely dependent on this NoteForm state, it's a wise idea to open up this NoteForm state file, because we're gonna be looking at it periodically to figure out what to do in the UI, which is stemming out of this state from the application layer. So just open up application, notes, NoteForm state, and we are going to go from there. So let's go ahead and inside the presentation layer for the NoteForm, we're going to create a new file over there, and let's name it NoteFormPage. .dart, of course. And this is going to be a stateless widget. And as I've said at the beginning, in this part, we are going to focus on everything except for the NoteForm fields. So we're going to have the basic skeleton. We're going to have the app bar, these buttons on the app bar. We're also going to implement that when we save a note and it's correct, so basically there are no errors, which means that all of the fields are filled with a valid value. We're going to also build in this part this loading overlay, which you can see right now. And we're also going to implement the fact that when you click on a note, the app bar says edit a note, and you can also just create a new note when you hit this plus floating action button. So let's get to it. Let's create a stateless widget, NoteFormPage. Let's import material.dart so that the errors are gone. And also, because we will have the ability to edit a node as opposed to creating a new node, we should be able to possibly accept the node entity which is currently being edited into this page. If it's passed in, we will know that we are currently editing an already existing node. If it's not passed in, if it's null, therefore, we're going to know that we are creating a new node. So we're going to create final node, edited node. Let's import the node entity and let's create constructor for final fields, just like this. And let's make the edited node required. Now would be a good time to actually run the app so that we can see the UI we are currently developing. And let's first implement the logic, which is going to ensure that actually pressing these buttons and already existing note cards is going to take us to this NoteForm page. So we want to go to the notes overview feature, or sub-feature should I say, and inside the Notes Overview page over there is a floating action button right here, which has a to-do in there saying that we should navigate to NoteFormPage. So now, since we have this NoteFormPage already, we're going to navigate, right? So what we want to do is to use the extended navigator, which comes with the auto route package. And we're going to say off context push NoteFormPage, which of course does not work because we currently don't have this route defined. So of course it would be a wise choice to first go to the router configuration file inside routes, router.dart. And since we have just added a new page called NoteFormPage, actually, we should add it as a material route, right? So we're going to say NoteFormPage, just like that. And actually, in the already finished app, you can see that we have this X symbol for closing, as opposed to the back arrow for navigating back. And this is accomplishable with specifying that this NoteFormPage is a full screen dialog. So we're just going to say full screen dialog true for the NoteFormPage, save that. Now, because we have edited something which has to do with auto route, we need to generate code. So let's use our favorite command, flutter pub run build run watch delete conflicting outputs. Once this has run, we are going to be able to use the extension method for navigating to the NoteFormPage without any issues. So here we go. We can now try it out. So let's go to Notes Overview page, and now there should be indeed a method called push NoteFormPage. So let's do just that. And since we are navigating to that page from Notes Overview, from the floating action button, we are about to create a brand new node. So this means that the edited node, which we specify over here, is going to be null. All right, with this done, we can come back to the app which we are currently developing. And when we press on this floating action button, we are going to be taken to a new page, which currently looks like this. It's completely blank and dark because we have not yet built any UI over there, but we know that it actually works, right? Now, the same thing sort of needs to happen when we press on a note card. So let's copy this line, which navigates to the NoteFormPage, and let's go over to a note card widget, which is present under Notes Overview subfeature, widgets, note card widget.dart. And somewhere in here, there should be a to-do. Of course there is, over here, implement navigation. So whenever a card is tapped, we want to navigate to the NoteFormPage. Somehow it doesn't want to work very well. Push NoteFormPage isn't defined, which is interesting. We probably just need to import our router. So let's import routes, right? If you write routes, auto import the router file, which we have defined right here. Then it's also going to make it so that you can use the extension methods, because again, extension methods are not auto importable as of now. All right, and the only difference we want to have here is that the edited node is not going to be null, but instead it's going to be filled in from the note field, which is present on this note card widget. Okay, and with this, when we now press on this note card, we are indeed going to be taken again to this dark page, which is nothing else than our NoteFormPage. So with this done, let's actually go back to this dark page and we're going to start implementing it with some actual UI, right? First and foremost, we know that we need to provide a NoteForm block down the widget tree from here. So the first thing we are going to return from here is going to be a block provider, which is going to create a block, which we can get, of course, from Getit, as we have gotten used to. It's NoteForm block. Let's import NoteForm block. So now this NoteForm block instance is going to be available down the widget tree, but this is not everything. If we take a look at the NoteForm block and its events, we have an event called initialized. And if you want to, you can always just check out the code from the link in the video description, or go over and watch some of the previous parts which dealt with implementing this NoteForm block, because it's quite a while since we have touched this code. But basically we have this initialized event which accepts a initial note option, and we are basically, of course, going to initialize the block, possibly with an already existing note. So we definitely want to add this initialized event to the block when we are starting to provide this block down the widget tree. So once we get it from Getit, of course, we say add, and we want to add this NoteForm event dot initialized, and this accepts a initial note option. So it's going to be an option of edited note, which is this field over here. But it kind of doesn't want to work because we need to import darts, and now it works. So basically, if edited note is null, it's going to pass in none. If it's not null, it's going to pass in some edited note. For now, we are going to make the child of the block provider very simple. We're just going to make it a scaffold. Later on in this part, we are going to come back here and add some error handling snag bars over here. But for now, let's just build a simple UI with a scaffold without any snag bars. So scaffold. Okay. It's already starting to look better than that red error of doom screen. But because I already know that this is going to become very, very nested if we leave the scaffold in here as it is right now, it's a wise idea to extract a widget. So let's say extract widget. We're going to call it NoteFormPage scaffold, like this. And we have just made sure that we are going to mitigate any nesting which would happen after a while once we are going to begin building this scaffold, right? So what's going to be in here? Of course, we want to have a nice app bar. Let's set it to app bar. Looks good. And as you can see, because we have made this route to be a full screen dialog, instead of that back arrow, we have a cross. So this app bar will have a title, and this title will be, of course, a text which can say edit a note when we are editing a note, like this, or it can also say create a note when we are creating a new note. So we need to make sure that this text can be dynamically built. And how in the world can we do that? Well, of course, our beautiful NoteForm state will take care of that. We have already implemented the logic which switches this isEditing boolean present on our NoteForm state either to true or false, depending on whether we are editing a node or not, right? So we need to read this field from the NoteForm state, and based on that, we are going to be able to build a different UI for the title. So let's go back. And of course, the way that we can do this with block is by using a block builder. So let's say block builder. It's going to be, well, actually, let's use the shortcut. So block builder. If you don't have the VS Code extension for block, I highly recommend it. So we're going to say NoteForm, because it's a NoteForm block and NoteForm state. And from here, we want to return a text. And if state is editing is true, we want to say edit a note. Otherwise, we're going to say create a note, just like this. And now it works, right? So we can see create a note, but when I press on the note card, and that's how I get into the NoteFormPage, it's going to say edit a note. So edit a note or create a note, and that's pretty cool. But we can optimize this block builder a bit, because currently, whenever the state of the NoteForm block changes, this text is always going to get rebuilt. But for example, if we just update one of the fields, for example, the body of the note, or when we are currently saving the note, which means that the full state has changed, we don't necessarily need to rebuild this part of the UI, because this part of the UI basically never changes. Once the UI is first built, the editing state of the note is never changing. So in order to spare some performance, although it's really minuscule in this case, we can use the build when comparison function, which is going to give us a previous state, which I'm going to abbreviate to P, and then current state, which I abbreviate to C. And we can decide whether or not to rebuild this particular part of the UI. And we're going to say that this should be only rebuilt if the previous states is editing Boolean is not equal to the current states is editing Boolean. And with this done, it's basically never going to get rebuilt ever after the first initial build in this case. All right, another thing which should appear on the app bar is the button to save the currently created or edited note. So this is possible via actions, which accepts a widget, which is going to be a simple icon button. And this icon button will have an icon, let's say icons, check. And also unpressed needs to be implemented, so it will look something like this. And unpressed, we can get hold of the block. So let's say context block NoteForm block, and we're going to add the only event which makes sense, which is NoteForm event dot saved. So this is going to trigger the logic to first validate the note, and then if everything is valid, then it's going to get saved to Firestore through the repository. Of course, in this case, because in this part we are now going to be building the note fields, what's going to happen is that the note will always be invalid, so nothing will be saved to Firestore. Why is that? Well, basically, we are always going to be operating with a NoteForm state, which has an empty note. Note will always be empty because we will not be able to change the values of the fields inside the note. So that means of the body, of the note color, and of the to-dos. And therefore, they're always going to be empty and invalid, just like in the already finished app when the note body is empty, we cannot continue, it says cannot be empty. We're going to bring this functionality into the app later on in future parts, but basically this is what's going to be happening behind the scenes. We are just not going to be able to see these error messages popping up because there are going to be no form fields visible. What I wanted to say by that is that we are safe. We are not going to be spamming our Firestore database with blank notes because they are just empty and invalid and unsavable, therefore. All right, now that's it for the app bar. Now the note form fields are going to be built as the body of the scaffold. But as I've said just now, we're going to leave it for later parts. So let's not touch the body of this page where the form fields would be, but instead let's focus on showing snag bars for error handling, and also let's focus on showing the saving in progress overlay. So how can we handle errors and show appropriate snag bars? Well, right here where we are simply using the NoteFormPage scaffold as the direct child of the block provider for the NoteForm block, we are instead going to wrap it inside a block listener. So actually, just a few days ago, this functionality was allowed by the state of the Dart something. I guess it's an issue with the VS Code, or maybe not. I don't know, maybe with the analyzer or something, but you could not wrap widgets with just any sort of other widget, like for example with block listener, but now you can do this right out of the comfort of VS Code with just a few shortcuts. So now we can wrap this widget with block listener, which is awesome. The block we want to get is of course the NoteForm block, and inside this listener we are going to show different snag bars depending on the possible error. And also let's make this NoteFormPage scaffold use the constant constructor for performance reasons. So we have already implemented this kind of a snag bar error showing thing in the UI before. If you're wondering where, I know it's been a while ago, but we have done this inside the auth. We find it, well, actually not auth, it's called sign in, of course. Sign in page, I guess. Actually sign in form. And over here, we have already implemented this kind of a flow where we check the form state's auth failure or success option. And if it's none, meaning that the user has not yet taken any action, we don't do absolutely anything. But if it's some, we will take the failure, in this case auth failure, in the NoteFormPage's case it's going to be a note failure. We take that possible failure or success of the action performed by the user, in this case saving the note. And if a failure occurred, we show a proper flush bar, which is a snag bar, but simply done. And in the case that the action has been successful, so again, in this case, if the note has been saved successfully, we perform some sort of a navigation. We just close off the page and do that kind of stuff. So we are going to do the same thing inside our NoteForm page. If you want to get a refresher, a more in-depth explanation to what I have just said, just watch some of the first parts where we have implemented the sign in form page. But now let's get down to business. So state save failure or success option dot fold. And if it's none, again, we don't want to do absolutely anything because no action has yet taken place. However, if it's some, first up, we want to give this a better name. So instead of A, we are going to call this either like this, because it indeed holds either a note failure, which indicates failure, or unit, which indicates successful saving of the note. So we want to make this into a block body like this. And now we want to get hold of this either and fold it. So if there is a failure in this either, what we want to do is that we want to show a flash bar, a snack bar. So in the case of a failure, we are going to, again, create a block body. It's getting heavily nested already, but this is the thing which we have to do. And we are going to say flash bar helper dot create error, and there will be of course a different message for the error snack bar depending on the note failure which has occurred. And of course there are multiple note failures which can happen. So we're going to say failure map, and we want to map all these different cases to different messages. If this was a production grade app which you would want to release on Google Play or the App Store or wherever, or Flutter Web, you would of course use some sort of a localization over here so that those messages would be localized to a given language of the device. But here again, we are just going to hard code all of these messages. And in order not to bore you to death with me typing out these strings, which are quite long, I'm actually going to copy and paste them from the finished app. So if you want to get this code, definitely check out the link from the video description. We are just basically going to say this, and I have just noticed that we have made some sort of an error, because in our case the parameter is not called insufficient permissions, but instead just a singular permission. This doesn't seem correct, but in order not to waste time right now by renaming this thing across many different files, especially since it's a generated thing, it's a freezed union, we're going to for now leave this grammatical error in place. Maybe we are going to fix it later. But this does not change the fact that we have just taken all of the possible failures and turned them into strings, which are going to be presented to the user via a flush bar, of course, after we say show on the flush bar like this. All right, but how can we test this flush bar when we are not going to get any errors because we have not yet implemented the NoteFormPage fully? We don't have the fields which we can fill in. Well, the simplest way to do this is to edit the initial state, right? So if you take a look, every time that this NoteFormPage is created, we get hold of a new instance of the NoteForm block, which by default has its state set to be this initial NoteForm state. So if we change this NoteForm states, say failure or success option, from none to some, let's say left, of course, because it's a failure, and the failure will be note failure insufficient permissions. Let's make it constant like this. When we do this, now the initial state holds this kind of a failure, and when we close off from the NoteFormPage, come back, you can see that immediately we get this sort of a snack bar, which is nice. So we can see how it looks like, and we know that the snack bar indeed works. Now that we know that it works, let's bring it back to none for the initial state of the NoteForm. Now again, we do not want this block listener to run for all kinds of state changes. We want this to run only when the say failure or success option has changed. So we're going to say listen when previous state and current state, so P and C, and we're going to say listen only when the previous state's save failure or success option is different from, so doesn't equal, the current state's save failure or success option. That's it. And then, in the case that saving the note has been successful, so we don't have any flashbars to show, we instead want to close the note form page so that the user will be taken to the notes overview page where they will be able to see their newly created note, right? So in order to do that, we are going to say that if there is no failure, but instead we get a unit from the either, we're going to again get hold of extended navigator of context. And you would think that we can just say pop, which would take us to the previous route. And that's actually true, but also not true in its entirety, because even flashbar is really a route. So in the rare case where you would have a flashbar showing on top of the bottom of the screen, and then you would call pop, you would not actually be taken to the notes overview page like this. The only thing which would happen if a flashbar is shown is that the flashbar would be hidden, but you would not navigate to the previous full page. So in order to always navigate to the previous full page, to the notes overview page, even when a dialog or when a flashbar is shown on top of the current page, we need to say pop until, and this pop until takes in a function predicate which passes us a route and returns a boolean to indicate when to actually stop popping. And we want to pop until the route, which is trying to be popped, has name, so route dot settings dot name equal to routes, which is our routes defined by us for the auto route. And over there is a route called notes overview page. All right, and this is the page which we do not want to pop. All of the routes before we get to the notes overview page, we want them to be popped by this pop until. So far, so good. We are actually never going to arrive over here because, as of now, because it's always going to be unsuccessful, the saving of a node, because the node is currently empty, which is its invalid state. But once we implement the node fields, we're going to be able to pop to the notes overview page after hitting this save button. Lastly, what we want to do right now is to show a save in progress overlay like this. If you could see it for a brief moment, saving, and the screen got dimmer, darker. And in order to show something on top of something else in Flutter, we need to use a stack. And how are we going to know whether to show this saving overlay or not? Well, again, we have a field inside the node form state, which is called isSaving. So we want to use a block builder to rebuild the UI, which is affected by this saving overlay. So what are we going to do? Well, we want to wrap this NoteFormPage scaffold inside a stack with children. So let's actually wrap it with a column, change it to a stack. And in order to show something on top of this NoteFormPage scaffold and its contents, which is later on going to also contain the NoteForm fields, what we need to do is to put the widget which we want to display on top below inside the stack children property list, of course. So if we do something like container color colors black, as you can see, now we cannot see actually anything, but when we comment it out, we are going to be able to see our beautiful UI. But of course, we want to enrich this container with a loading indicator and all that. But also we want to make this container to dynamically either turn on or turn off, be displayed or not, depending on this is saving. So we need to use a block builder, right? We are inside a block listener, so we are going to create just even more nesting by creating a new block builder widget here, and we are going to be nested till the end of times. Well, thankfully, we do not need to create yet another block builder widget. What we can do instead is, instead of block listener, we can say block consumer. And with this, we now don't have a child. Let's cut it out. But instead we have a builder, which provides us with context and state. And from here we can return the stack, which we have just created. Just like this, it's wonderful. But of course, again, we do not want to rebuild this part of the UI, which is actually going to be quite expensive to rebuild, just on every single state change. For example, we do not want to rebuild this when just a single field, for example, the note body field, is updated by the user. That would be completely crazy and expensive to do. So because of that, we want to again provide a build when for previous P and C current state, and we want to rebuild this part of the UI fully only when the previous states is saving is not equal to the current states is saving, like this. And now we are being considerate of the resources and not wasting them just as we go. Now for the actual container, because we of course just cannot leave it as this, and we also need to make it dynamic to the is saving boolean. So let's go to this container, and I'm going to say extract widget. Let's call it saving in progress overlay, like this. Now we have it created over here. We need to pass in a final bool is saving. Let's add it to the parameters and let's make it required. And let's immediately pass in this boolean. So is saving is equal to state from the block is saving. Now, how can we make this container to be transparent when we are not saving, but have some sort of a black color when we are saving? Of course, it's not going to be fully black, it's going to be a bit transparent. Well, there are multiple ways to do this, but if we want to have this nicely animated, so it's not just going to pop in here fully black and then come out of the screen so that it's fully transparent, we want to have some sort of an animation. Instead of using a regular container, we are going to use an animated container. Currently we have an error because we need to specify the duration parameter, which is required. So the duration for the animation, let's say that it's going to be const duration milliseconds 150. That's what I found to be a good number. And of course the color should be dynamic. So we are going to say is saving, and if it is saving, we're going to say colors black with opacity 0.8. Otherwise it's going to be fully transparent, so colors transparent. Cool. Now because we are not saving, you can see that it's transparent by default. But how can we actually build this UI if is saving is always false? Well, one option is to just say is saving here to be always true. So discard this is saving boolean for now. Or other option is of course to go into the node form state and edit the initial state. But I think that editing the boolean directly inside this widget is the better option right now, because it's just more visible here. Let's, however, deal with the elephant in the room right now, because now it kind of makes sense that the widget, which is below the saving in progress overlay, is not tappable, right? NoteFormPage scaffold and these buttons on the app bar are not tappable, which makes sense because the overlay is turned on. However, if we make the color to be transparent, so we say false, now the overlay is seemingly not present, but we still cannot tap these buttons over here. So what can we do? Well, we can wrap this animated container inside another widget, which is called ignore pointer. And we're going to say ignoring to be equal to not is saving. And actually, let's make the color also dependent on is saving. And we're just going to change the value of is saving. Actually, let's create a same named final is saving. So there will be some shadowing going on, name shadowing, but at least it's going to work. So is saving is true. Just like this. Okay, cool. So now we cannot tap it when it's false. Now we can tap it, which is what we wanted. So let's make it back to true so that we can see what we are currently building. And there's not going to be just this kind of an overlay, but of course we also want to show a loading indicator. So we are going to add a column here as the child of the animated container. So it's going to have children, and let's say circular. Progress indicator will be here. Let's make it constant. So it currently looks something like this. What's going on here? I don't understand, right? Well, what's going on is that since we have just added a real child of the container, it's now not being stretched to the full available width and height available to this animated container widget inside of its parent. Now it's actually taking the size of the column, which is its direct child. So what we can now do is that we are going to say cross axis alignment, and we are going to say stretch. But now it again looks kind of weird, doesn't it? I mean, this circle of progress indicator is just completely stretched too, so that's not cool either. So instead of doing this, what we need to do is to just set the main axis alignment to be center, like this, so that the spinning circular progress indicator is in the center vertically. And in order to again stretch this whole animated container across the screen, what we need to do is to set the width of the container to be the full screen width. So what do we want to do? We want to say media query of context and set the size, or actually get the size and width, which is the full width of the screen, and nothing happens. Why is that? Let's check out the debug console. Well, we are not going to see anything, but what's happening is that we also need to set the height. So height like this, and now once we have set both dimensions, both width and height, this animated container is actually going to fill the whole space which the screen offers, which is precisely what we want. We want it to take the whole screen up, or take up the whole screen. Phrasal verbs. Now, just a very light cosmetic touch. In addition to having just this circular progress indicator, what we want to have here in addition is a text which says saving. But if we add it over here just like this, it's going to look horrible. I mean, what's going on? Well, the reason why it looks so horrible And I'm not sure why the circular progress indicator stopped spinning, but that's probably a different issue. But the reason why it looks so bad is because we are not within a scaffold. The scaffold is in an entirely different widget. We are just inside a stack. And when you are not inside a scaffold, you don't get the themes automatically. So what we need to do is that we need to fetch the proper text style from the current theme ourselves. So we're going to say style on the text widget, and we're going to say theme of context, text theme, and body text too. And we want to copy this with a different color, so colors white. Cool. And also we want to make it a bit bigger, so font size is gonna be 16, like that. Looks cool. And let's also add a bit of a spacing from the circular progress indicator. So we're going to say const sized box with height equal to 8. Awesome. So now with this done, we can remove the isSaving variable, which is here only for shadowing, the one which is a field. And actually we are still not done, as I can see, because what's now happening is that even though the animated container is animated away, it's now transparent, we are still showing the circular progress indicator and also the saving text. So what can we do about that? Well, we need to wrap this column inside a new widget, visibility, and we're going to say visible, set it to isSaving. So only when we are saving, we want this column to be visible together with its indicators. And now it's hidden. And of course, we could use this visibility also directly up here, wrapping the animated container itself. Why we are not doing that? Well, because then we would lose the nice animation of going between this black with 80% opacity to transparent. So in order to have this nice transition with this 150 millisecond duration, we just cannot use this visibility directly on the container itself, but only on the child. Awesome, so that's it for this part where we have built quite a substantial amount of the UI for the NoteFormPage, but actually it's still a long journey to go because we need to build the UI for the form fields, and especially with to-dos, it's going to be quite challenging to build them, so you have something to look forward to still in the next parts. So definitely subscribe if you haven't already, and also join Notification Squad by hitting the bell button to make sure you grow your Flutter skills, because here on ResoCoder, I am determined to provide you with the best tutorials and resources so that you will become an in-demand Flutter developer. And if you are serious about becoming a great Flutter developer who can build real apps for clients or at a job, go to flutter.education, link is also in the video description by the way, to get the top curated Flutter news and resources aimed at improving your app development career. Over there you can also subscribe to my mailing list to get the best Flutter resources delivered weekly right into your inbox. So if this video helped you, give it a like and also share it with other developers who are going to find it beneficial too. Leave a comment if you have anything to say, and see you in the next video.